Today, we're looking at Noodler's Antietam. Hi, I'm Adam, and I'm an ink guy. I get inks, test them, and share the results with you. Noodler's Antietam is a red-brown ink. Now, before we get to the writing samples, let's take a look at the sciencey bits. Up first is a chromatography, and I agree with Vita that I've learned a lot by doing multiple chromatographies. The one on the left is done the way it's supposed to be done. I put a line of ink down, I dunk it into water, and I let that ink creep up. And what we see here is a pink that starts out, a very dark red that comes after that. I let the one on the right dry for 10 minutes before I dunk it into the water. We see that the line on the bottom is definitely very dark and it's starting to become permanent. We still see that pink, we still see that red, but it looks as if this ink could start to truly hold on to the paper given some time. Now, resistance tests are done to see how it can be expected to hold up on paper and how hard it might be to clean out of a pen. I let the smear dry for 3 days before testing it. Looking at the highlighter, surprisingly, a lot more moved than I would have expected. I would not use this in a note-taking situation. Water also got it moving quite a bit. Now, I just put that drop down for about 30 seconds and then dabbed it straight up, but most of that ink came up. Only a little bit of that pink remained. Flush did the same thing. It really lifted this off the page, and I fear that it would go away very quickly, although I don't tend to care about the water resistance. I want it out of the pen. Bleach, it's coming off the paper. It's coming out of the pen if you were to absolutely have to use bleach, and I don't see why with this ink. The good news is you shouldn't have to. This is a bell curve, or a normal distribution of the 365 inks I've tested. I have found an average viscosity of 2.5. Now, normal is the range from 2.1 to 2.9. Noodler's Antietam has a viscosity of 1.33. Looking at the bell curve, that is dangerously close to being a water-like flow. This super heavy flow. So watch out with those very broad, very wet nibs. This bell curve is for the average dry time. For the 365 inks I have tested, I've found an average dry time of 17 seconds, and normal is the range from 13 to 21 seconds. Noodler's Antietam has a dry time of 18 seconds. Very normal, very in the normal range, a little longer than the middle, but totally in the normal range. That's very good news for how wet this ink is, but it's getting into that page quite quickly. To find my average dry time, I average the writing samples with the extra fine and medium nib done on Clairefontaine, Tomoe River, and Rhodia paper. Let's take a look at the writing samples. I have this ink in sample form, and to keep writing samples consistent, I use a Jinhao 159 with a Goulet 1.1 stub. I use a Jinhao X450 with a Goulet medium, and a Jinhao X750 with a Goulet extra fine. Let's look at Clairefontaine. I have no bleeding, no real show through. Looking at the 1.1 stub, we have no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen. We're getting some decent color variation. It goes from a really dark to almost like brownish in spots. On the extra fine, no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen. Beautiful red color with some really dark spots that do occur. So this is very nice. It's almost like a blood red before it dries blood. So some nice color variation. 13 seconds to dry. Moving on to the medium, we have no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen. Some really nice color variation. You really get to see it with the medium. So we get it in we get it in quick, a lot of it in brown. 17 seconds to dry. We look at the scrubby and we see we're going to get a lot of color variation that occurs. It's just that it's in the very dark spectrum of this red that we're getting it. On a smear, I can definitely recover this if I was to smear this ink as I was writing with it. Moving on to Tomoe River. On Tomoe River, we get no bleeding, definite ghosting all the way through because it is Tomoe River. On the 1.1, we have no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, no color variation.
We lose it on this paper. It's gone. Moving on to the extra fine. No feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen. Very little, if any, color variation. 19 seconds to dry. Don't be in a hurry when you use this ink on this paper. In the medium, we have no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen. We get some color variation, not a whole lot. Again, the color variations that occur are really selective in where they happen. I see some of it where the J is. I see some of it on the 5, but not a whole lot of other spots with color variation or shading. 25 seconds to dry. Looking at the scrubby, we don't expect to see color variation because the scrubby's not showing us any. And if you smear this ink, like many inks on Tomoe River, this will not be recoverable. It just takes too long to dry. At 19 seconds, the fastest, I can't smear this while I write and hope to recover it. And that's okay, because it's this paper. We move on to the Rhodia. We have no bleeding, no ghosting. In the 1.1, we have no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen. Not a ton of color variation in the 1.1. Moving on to the extra fine, we have no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen. We are getting a little bit of color variation. Not a lot. Not a lot where I would even expect to really be able to see it. We see that in the scrubby. Very little that happens. 15 seconds to dry. The medium gets a little bit darker than the extra fine. The medium has no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen. Again, some color variation that's going on here. It's a little more than what we got with the extra fine, but not a ton. But we're definitely getting some color variation with the medium, even though it's taking 19 seconds to dry. Looking at the scrubby, we can see that the medium is going to give us more of a color variation than the extra fine. And when it comes to smearing it, it would last. Now, sometimes I like to use the Rhodia yellow pad just so I can see what happens to it when I put it on a toned paper like yellow. I use these yellow pads a lot at work. So I'm looking at this to see just really the color changing that goes on. This is still Rhodia paper. As it's still Rhodia paper, we're not going to have any ghosting. We're not going to have any bleed. It just doesn't happen very often. The 1.1 still gives us no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen. We actually get a little more color variation here, and that's because of the yellow that's back. It gets a little darker than it did with the white. So that's nice. When we move on to the extra fine, we're going to have the same dry time of 15 seconds. We still have no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen. It's still Rhodia paper. We start getting tiny hints of color variation that are going on, which is nice. We move on to the medium. We get still no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen. More color variation than we had on the white. So that yellow background is giving us more variation because of its background, because of the undertones that it allows to make darker in certain areas. On the scrubbies, we see that we get a little bit more of it in the medium. We see that we don't have very much of it in the extra fine. And a smear, we would still be able to basically recover. Now I'm looking at Original Crown Mill as the next one, and I chose this one because I was a little surprised that it did this. I'm getting bleed. Once I have bleed, it doesn't even matter if there's show-through. There is show-through, but I expect it because I do have bleed. In the 1.1, I have no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, almost no color variation. And it's not drying that much faster than it did on the other papers. So that's odd. In the extra fine, I have no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen. The no feather, so there's spots that look like it would be feather. It's the texture of the paper. I wouldn't really blame it on the ink. It's the texture of the paper being a laid paper. So there's almost like channels for the ink to run into. It's not the fault of the ink. So when there's little spots like occur in the over, that's not a deficiency on the ink's part. It's just a function of the paper. 10 seconds to dry. Medium gets a little bit darker than the extra fine. That texture of the paper that makes it look like feathering, we get it a little bit more. We have no spread, no halo, no sheen, no real color variation. 13 seconds to dry. Looking at the scrubby, Both of these show that we're not going to expect a lot of color variation to occur here, but on the smear, we would be able to recover it, although this is not really your note-taking kind of a paper. So that's what we got with this.
Instead of finding inks that look like Noodler's Antietam, I would prefer to find an ink that would really complement the color on the page. Being that Noodler's Antietam is a kind of red-brown, I've chosen a nice blue-black. What blue-black, you say? Diamine Blue-Black. It's in the name. Now, before I give my opinion on this ink, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. And if you're new here, I'd invite you to subscribe. To make sure I have a range of experience with this ink, I do the writing samples. I put that ink into a different pen and use it for a day. I then put it into a Retro 51 Tornado with a broad nib to take my notes for this video. So what do I think of Noodler's Antietam? When you put it into a broad, wet pen like that Retro 51 Tornado, you get a very dark red that as it dries, it becomes this brown, like dried blood. It is a very interesting color. It's definitely attention grabbing, and people are going to ask what you're writing with. It is standout, beautiful for that reason. So now the big question, would I buy a bottle of this ink? Yes, it performs well, and the color is absolutely its own. I don't know that there's another one just like it. Thanks for watching.